In part 1 of this series, we explored the complex politics that led to Joash being crowned King of Judah at the age of 7. In this talk, we'll look at some of the key events that took place in the early years of his reign. Once the boy king is crowned, 2 Chronicles chapter 23 records that the crowd makes its way to the temple of Baal in Jerusalem. They tear it down. They smash the idols of Baal, and indeed they kill the high priest of Baal. And at first glance this sounds pretty horrific. And yet it's very similar to what Jehu did in the northern kingdom after he overthrew the house of Ahab. Then there's Elijah. If you recall, when Elijah was on top of Mount Carmel and he had his great victory, well, he called for the prophets of Baal to be seized, and later on they were slaughtered. Well, it's a principle of historical analysis that we should not rush to impose our modern value systems on people of a different age. Within its historical context, the citizens of the southern kingdom are reasserting their identity as a nation before the Lord. But when we get to the New Testament, the context is very different. The apostles preach their message within a pluralistic culture where different religions are tolerated. I find it interesting that nowhere in the book of Acts do you find Christian believers calling for idolatrous temples to be destroyed or their priests put to death. Indeed, there's a riot in Ephesus recorded in Acts 19, and the city clerk defends the followers of Jesus with these words. He says, "You have brought these men here, though they have neither robbed temples nor blasphemed our goddess." Now, we may disagree on some points with the followers of other religions. Indeed, we may well disagree with the followers of no religion. But we need to be careful that we treat others with respect. It is too easy, especially on social media, to resort to language that is not measured, that ridicules other people, and that ultimately negates our claim that we love other people. And even if we ourselves are subjected to abuse online, we must take the higher ground and illustrate the graciousness that so typifies the gospel. Well, let's return to our passage. Joash grows up, receives an education, marries, and starts to produce some heirs to continue his line. And little by little he learns what it means to be king. When he's in his 20s, he notices that the temple of the Lord is not being maintained as it should. The temple had been neglected and even ransacked during the reign of Athaliah and her husband Jehoram. Preference had been given to the temple of Baal. But with the restoration of the worship of the Lord, there has been plenty of money coming in. The question is, where has the money been going? Well, it's not clear from Scripture where the problem lies. Are some of the priests perhaps diverting funds for their own purposes? Or are they trying to complete the repairs themselves and not making a good job of it? Well, King Joash demands that repairs be made, and when his instructions are not carried out, he goes to confront Jehoiada. It must have been difficult having words with the man who had saved his life, who had raised him to the throne, who had taught him as a child. But it needs to be done, and this is what's recorded in 2 Kings chapter 12. Therefore King Joash summoned Jehoiada the priest and the other priests and asked them, why aren't you repairing the damage done to the temple? Take no more money from the treasurers, but hand it over for repairing the temple." The priests agreed they would not collect any more money from the people, and they would not repair the temple themselves. Jehoiada the priest took a chest and bored a hole in its lid. He placed it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the temple of the Lord. The priests who guarded the entrance put into the chest all the money that was brought to the temple of the Lord. Whenever they saw there was a large amount of money in the chest, the royal secretary and the high priest came, counted the money, and gave it to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple. With it they paid the carpenters and builders, masons and stone cutters. Well, notice a partnership here between the temple and the palace. The priests clearly want the work completed, but they need help from others to make this happen. And I think there's a lesson here for us. We can sometimes find ourselves in situations where things are not being run as they ought. And without necessarily taking over, sometimes all it is required is to lend a helping hand to nudge things in the right direction. I remember several years ago volunteering in a charity shop where there was lots of activity and many items being sold, but actually very little money was being raised for the charity. It took a fresh pair of eyes and a willingness to get stuck in for things to start moving in the right direction. So let me leave you with this thought. How can we play a meaningful role within our own communities, especially as lockdown, hopefully, is drawing to a conclusion? We don't necessarily have to take over, but a willingness to serve others can go a long way.